The motion be agreed to.
Mr. Speaker.
Andrew Little.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Employment Relations Amendment Bill is a nasty, insidious document, yet another repeat of the nasty, insidious strategy that this national government has for working New Zealanders. That's what it is, and that was a shocking address, a shocking speech on a matter that affects hundreds of thousands of working people every day. Far from being balanced, there could not be a more unbalanced, a more radical change to our employment laws and our workplace code than this bill. It's just another continuation of the nasty rubbish that this government insists on serving up to hard-working New Zealanders. 13,679 submissions, more than 160 oral submissions, most of them, the vast majority, totally and deeply opposed to what is in this bill. And the advice from the officials from the civil service is this: the proposed options are likely to increase choice and reduce compliance costs for some employers. They will reduce choice for unions and employees and may expose New Zealand to critical international scrutiny over its international labour obligations. This national government does not care about the long and enduring obligations that this country has stuck with when it comes to the treatment of workers in this country. It just does not care. The evidence is clear-cut. It is getting harder and harder for workers in New Zealand workplaces today to get their voice heard, whether it's for wages, whether it's for other issues that affect them in the workplace, even whether it's for health and safety, and I'll come back to that in a minute. Now, before looking at what this bill actually does, which is nothing like what the Minister introduced or reintroducing the bill does, let's actually look at the problem that we're trying to fix in this country. Let's look at the labour market problem in this country. Wages. It is wages and incomes. The bottom half of the workforce in New Zealand, their pay or wages have stayed the same in real terms or gone backwards over the last 20 years. The last 20 years. 50% of New Zealand workers, their pay rates have stayed the same in real terms or gone backwards over the last 20 years. What about productivity improvements? It'll be news to this government because they mislead this House all the time about it. But the reality is that productivity in this country has improved gradually, incrementally, but has improved every year for the last 20 years. It's improved by nearly 50% in the last 20 years in this country. Real wages on average have moved barely 14%. If the average wage in this country had actually matched productivity improvements, the very thing that Business New Zealand and its acolytes in the National Party call for, the average hourly wage in this country would be between $7 and $8 an hour better than it is now. The truth is that wages in this country have not been keeping pace with productivity, as Business New Zealand keeps on claiming it should do. What is the other fact here? 400,000 workers in this country, nearly 1/5 of the workforce, dependent on tax credits because their earned income is not enough to make ends meet. 400,000 people dependent on tax credits because their wages don't allow them to make ends meet. That is a shame. That is a shameful statistic, and that is something that this House ought to be embarrassed about. At the very least, it ought to prompt this government to do something meaningful about it, to do something meaningful about wages and incomes. The problem in the labour market in this country today is wages and incomes. They are too low, they don't keep pace, and New Zealand workers, far too many of them, are being ripped off. We've had economic growth in this country. We've had productivity improvement. So affording better wages is not the issue in this country. Affording better wages isn't the issue. For the National Party, it's about screwing more out of workers and giving it to their rich mates in corporate New Zealand. That's what they want to achieve, and that's why this bill is drafted the way that it is. Wages and incomes are going backwards for far too many for far too long. What would a solution look like to this particular problem? Well, first of all, we would want mechanisms to improve bargaining so that workers aren't fearful about approaching their employer to say, you know what, I've been here a year or a couple of years, I'm doing a pretty good job, the manager seems pretty happy with me, can I get a pay increase? Or here's something else. Why don't we protect the freedom of choice to belong to a union? So people don't have the employers standing over them saying, you go anywhere near the union, you're in trouble, because that's what happens. Why don't we have mechanisms to improve wage bargaining and collective bargaining at that? Why don't we give a greater voice to working people and to protect the freedom of association? Why don't we respect the right, the internationally recognised right to strike? This government, with this bill, wants to punish people for standing on their digs and standing up to bad employers and taking industrial action, including when that industrial action doesn't lead to any loss of production or revenue or income at all. That is how nasty and vicious this national government has become when it comes to New Zealand workers. This bill will fix no problem that I can see in the labour market. It panders to and cuddles up to the worst employers in this country, the donors to the National Party who keep saying to their MP mates in the National Party, do something, give us a bit more, squeeze more blood out of the worker stone so it's better for us. This bill sets up a number of things. The peremptory opt-out of employers of multi-employer collective bargaining. Never mind that workers have to go through various hoops to get their employer around the table with others in their industry, to get some commonality, some baseline conditions in their industry. Never mind that workers have to vote on that, and never mind that workers choose to have that. This government says whatever employers want, employers should get. It's not about mutual relationships. It's not about mutual respect in relationships. It's about whatever the boss wants. And then we have employers going to the Employment Relations Authority to get a declaration that bargaining is at an end. I have to say, the sole redeeming feature of the minister's statement in the House just now is that they accepted, after protestations at the Select Committee I might have, were rebuffed by the government, and indeed personal approaches to the minister were rebuffed. It is pleasing to see the government has recognised that a fundamental condition to the Employment Relations Authority interfering in bargaining is that at least the applicant to the declaration has to have met their good faith requirements. It's part of the employment jurisdiction that we've had for over 100 years in this country. It's called the equity and good conscience jurisdiction. And it comes from the equitable principle that who comes to equity comes with clean hands. You could not possibly have an employer rocking up to the Employment Relations Authority demanding a declaration that bargaining is at an end and no requirement that they have acted in good faith all the way through. I have to say that that is the only redeeming feature in the statement in the House this afternoon. Then there is the removal of the 30-day rule, amongst other things here. The one thing that when unions negotiate a collective agreement, workers in a workplace come together, get the best deal for their employer, and they don't do it just for themselves, they do it for every generation of worker that follows and the new workers that start. That now will be undermined. The freedom of choice that workers exercised to join together, negotiate collectively with their employer, can now be undermined by that new employer provision. It is all about driving down wages, as if that somehow the wages in this country are a problem. Well, it doesn't help, of course, when you've got a Minister of Finance and others who go abroad boasting to other countries and the big businesses in those countries about how low our wages are, and therefore that's a reason to relocate here. This bill is all about saying to workers, leave your brains at the gate. Your thoughts aren't welcome here. Your voice has no place in this workplace. This bill is all about saying, leave your spirit and your motivation at home, because we don't want that at work. It's about command and control. Command and control of the employer, because that's all this National Party understands. It doesn't understand modern workplace relationships. It doesn't understand genuinely, mutually respectful workplace relationships. This government, like this bill, is embarrassingly out of date. Here's the challenge we have in this country. It is to create high-quality workplace relationships and high-quality workplaces with high-quality businesses that respect workers' rights, that respect freedom of association, that are respectful of the place of workers and their thoughts and their ideas when it comes to decision-making. The challenge is to have high-performance workplaces managed well with good quality managers. Everything in this bill, like every a piece of employment legislation passed by this government, incentivises bad managers and poor management. And the one thing we need is workers in this country properly and fairly paid. This bill will do the opposite. That's why we are opposed to it, totally and utterly, and we will object strenuously every step of the way.
I call David Bennett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I just wanted to follow on from that speech.